Elden Ring Nightreign, as I'm sure you're already aware, is not exactly your grandma's cozy Elden Ring experience. This game is about efficiency and building momentum as fast as possible. You do not have the time to check every long hallway for yet another arterial leaf you'll never use, or a suspicious dead drop of mushrooms. You should be running past most enemies like you're trying to diet a smelter demon for the 20th time. And you should not be saving your consumables for a rainy day, because foul tarnished, today is that day. The storm is approaching. And wow, I hope you're a grower, cause size matters in this game. Welcome to 20 combat tips and tricks to maximize your efficiency in Elden Ring Nightreign. Here's a free bonus tip, so you know I'm as serious as a fog wall. So you may have heard that status boluses have a hidden use. Well, they have two hidden uses actually. Well, kinda hidden. The game tells you if you read the description, which I'm sure we all did. While they primarily alleviate the buildup of statuses, they also permanently increase your resistance to said status, as you can see in my status tab right here. And this lasts the entire expedition. On top of that, they gradually restore a bit of health, like little baby life gems from Dark Souls 2. The regen lasts for 20 seconds and restores about this much. It's not a ton of HP regen, but it definitely can be useful if you have them on hand, or to top off when you come across them, since you can just eat them as you find them for the resistance and the tiny bit of health. Unlike life gems though, you can't crush like 10 of these and become unkillable, as the regen does not stack with consecutive boluses, and it's always the same rate and amount healed regardless of how many of these weird cotton balls you swallowed. But the resistance boosts do stack with different ones, although each one seems to cap out at +9, at least according to the status menu. But okay, now that I have your attention, I am Brinks, and I've spent way too much of my life playing Souls games. I'm sure you've watched plenty of these tips videos already, so rather than telling you what churches and mines are for and how to upgrade your weapons, it is my goal to teach you some fighting strategies and mechanics to be more efficient in your runs, and just general combat-specific tips and tricks that you may not know or had forgotten since your last journey to fight the worst final boss in any Souls game. Timestamps in the description if you want to skip around, but I recommend watching the whole list. But while you're down there, you may as well start practicing your efficiency now by liking the video. Minor spoiler warning, as there will be a few clips of some Nightlord fights. No final boss spoilers though. Let's get into it. Number 1. Starting with a big combat one that I never see many people doing that can increase your DPS and boss kill times by a good chunk. Welcome to the hit and crit. Or optimizing your stance break if you want a normal description. So stance breaking a boss is a huge opportunity to really beat its ass. Not just with the crit, but you can actually do a lot of extra damage to it here beyond just your riposte. First off, enemies, and I believe most bosses, take extra damage while waiting to be stabbed in the face. And second, the head is also typically the weak spot for most large creatures. And most of those large creatures, things like dragons, trolls, golems, worms, centipede demon, falling star beasts, etc., remain in this state long enough that you get a guaranteed jump attack, or sometimes more, on their head before you even take the crit. And depending on your weapons, you can potentially do more damage by just ignoring the crit outright and hammering on attacks. Although in co-op you still probably don't want to miss the crit window, since it keeps them in place for so long that it lets your whole team go to town during the animation. And unlike in base Elden Ring and most of the Souls games, things still take damage while they're stuck in a crit animation. So if you've got the stamina and you're close enough when the boss goes down, you will really want to squeeze this in before the crit for a good chunk of extra damage, especially if it's a daytime boss, since you want to kill them as fast as possible. And you doing this may even be the difference between triggering a bleed or poison proc too, for even more damage. This is especially useful for the bosses who take less body damage than head damage, but are a pain in the ass to actually hit in the face, which is pretty much all the same creatures I mentioned before except for the golems, since you hit them in the ankles. And given that for the bigger ones, you'll probably still have to jump over their limbs anyway to get to the shiny crit spot, you may as well get some extra damage while you're repositioning. Number 2. Now for another very important one. This one's not directly combat oriented, but it can lead to it, and I don't see enough people talking about it. Watch out for mimics. You have to pay attention to the way the chain curls. Number 3. Against smaller enemies, like most of the humanoid ones, they generally have much smaller windows to crit after a stance break, and can usually be staggered out of the stance break with heavier attacks just canceling the crit outright, which you definitely don't want. So instead of risking that, the safer option is to just simply take the time to let your stamina recover before you violate their organs. And if the enemy starts to stand up sooner than you expected, just hit R1 and you should still get your crit since you weren't locked into an attack. This sounds trivial, but given the amount of times I've gotten greedy and risked the rest of my stamina for a lucky stance break, it's really nice to have your stamina fully recovered by the time the enemy stands up. Plus, your stamina can go into the negative during the crit, and will take slightly longer to come back when you do this, which might mean you're stuck just standing there menacingly, watching the enemy get up from the ground, instead of finishing them off before they can do anything. And obviously this is useful against the same large bosses as tip number 1 if you aren't sure you'll have enough time or stamina to do a big attack and still get the crit in time. Stamina management is everything in these games. Number 4. This next tip is usually a rite of passage that every Souls player has to learn eventually. 97% of the time, you want to roll towards or to the side of danger, rather than away from it. Many attacks are designed to catch you if you roll away, and in many cases, rolling towards a boss or enemy puts you in a much better position that's awkward for them to hit without turning or performing a usually telegraphed spin or AoE. And you can usually get quicker follow-ups. Crucible Knights especially look like cosplayers once you start rolling diagonally to their sides and strafing around them. You'll find a lot of bosses become so much easier when you commit this to your muscle memory, as you can often simply strafe for larger punishes as their follow-ups will whiff against your superior positioning. The Bell-Bearing Hunter, infamously one of the most threatening and run-ending bastards in this game, is much easier to deal with when you're literally sniffing him. He tends to use less telekinetic nonsense point blank, and in my opinion is much easier to fight when you show him no fear. And along the lines of that, if you've got him just throwing out his slow basic ass sword swings and you've got a shield, parry his ass. It's actually easier than you may think. Although a lot of this goes out the window and co-op a bit, if you're all scattered around, because he likes to just pretend to focus one target, but then helicopter his sword to wipe out everyone. So, I don't really have advice when he's using hacks like that. Just get in the habit of attempting to dodge every attack, even if you're not sure it was meant for you. Crucible Knights, and the vast majority of humanoid enemies are also quite susceptible to being parried, which is a lot easier to do if you're constantly rolling toward them and keeping up pressure. So, unless you're playing a caster, you generally want to be fearless and stay close. Just watch your stamina. There is no harm in skipping a punish to let your stamina recover. And as a side tip about stamina management, most of the time you really want to leave just enough so you can roll, rather than always being greedy and emptying your bar, and being stuck with no stamina when you need to dodge. And one notable exception to the golden roll-in rule is this one attack from dragons. You want to always roll away from them as they land, and you'll get a couple free hits on their face, which is their weak spot. But normally you'll be rolling towards them on everything else so that you can either slap their feet till they trip, or stay around their neck so you can get hits on their face to stance break them. This is also better to do with the camera unlocked, in my opinion, so you can freely control the camera and see their attacks coming, and especially react to the flame breaths so you can run right the hell in the opposite direction. Number 5. As I'm sure you're well aware, this game rewards loot goblin behavior with all the passive buffs you get from the weapons filling your pockets. Well, you should be doing the same with consumables. You should be breaking these sparkly crates, which are in like every place of interest, pick them all up, and more importantly, use them, like literally spam them. There are so many good items in this game. Now, dear viewer, you may counter, stamina comes back, a firebomb or an elemental grease won't, so I should save it for the best possible time, just like in base Elden Ring. Well then I would argue, don't do that, because an exalted flesh or an elemental grease will increase your DPS, and throwing pots and throwing knives do pretty solid range damage, especially early on in a run. And you'll find many chances to take advantage of all these things if you think outside of the box. The spark aromatic perfumes, for example, if you luck out and finding some, are pretty incredible early game, as they do a lot more damage per use than you'll be able to do until later. Even the Bewitching branch, which I seem to find in church crates more than anything else, but are pretty rare, charm enemies to fight for you, and can drastically alter a night boss encounter if you use them on the right enemies. It worked so well for me in this Omen fight that this Omen no longer knows where he is, and wanders off seeking to prove himself in combat against a bigger foe. Consumables are so plentiful in this game that there really is no reason you should be hoarding any of them. This is not base Elden Ring. Think of them as yet another tool to help you get better gear and more levels faster. If you're full, you can use ones on the ground directly by just holding your interact button and pressing D-pad up, which is great for the boluses I mentioned earlier, or even popping some of the gold or silver Foulfoot to get more souls or better item discovery. The most important ones to look out for, in my opinion, especially for bosses, are elemental greases, warming stones, exalted flesh, and the boiled crabs or prawns. and Starlight Shards if you're doing a lot of casting, since only the Recluse has a direct way of recovering FP. So casters might want to share their meats or buff greases with the melee characters in exchange for Starlight Shards. If you do this, just hold your interact button and press your left stick to ping the ground in front of you if you're playing with randoms. Remember, only loot goblins who share get to kill the Night Lord. And all of these items, besides for greases, can be bought from the merchant before the Night Lord. So don't be shy chucking firebombs or throwing daggers while you're stuck chasing the boss chase your teammate around, or even as an opener as you rush into a group. And for the record, greases work on every weapon regardless of element, including bows, unlike base Elden Ring. But they don't work on great bows, crossbows, or ballistas. And warming stones, which I could almost give their own section, can be a great way to top off your health without wasting a flask, and they affect your entire team. They last for 30 seconds, and as you can see here, recover a pretty great chunk of health. And this is the range that they're effective at. And if you get creative, you'll find plenty of times to actually use them mid-fight. Teammate down, throw down a stone to recover some health while you beat their ass till they get up and start pulling their weight. Dance break a boss? Well, as mentioned in tip number 1, for the bigger bosses, you'll have enough time to drop a stone and then still land your crit. Or if your teammate is already doing the crit, you can just skip a tiny bit of DPS to regen some health for everyone as you gangbang the vulnerable boss. Your teammates will thank you. Warming stones are even more useful during the night bosses, half of which will have you running around the arena as they make it their life's mission to execute your teammate or attack your graphics card directly. There is no rush to kill the night bosses. I need to emphasize that. So don't feel bad running to the other side of the arena and basking in the warm healing glow of your shiny rocks while the boss tests your buddy's stamina management. And for those of you that like data, buff greases and exalted flesh last for 30 seconds, pickled turtleneck, boiled crab, boiled prawn, and gold and silver fowl feet last a minute, and bewitching branches last 3 minutes. All of the self-buffs stack with each other except for the exalted flesh and the seafoods, as they override each other. And the prawn and crab don't stack, since boiled crab is just a stronger version of boiled prawn, and they'll just override each other. Number 6. When a boss is stance broken, not every Nightfarer should probably be taking the crit if you have the choice. As a general rule of thumb, the melee characters with bigger weapons like Wilder and Raider will do more damage on crits than the ranged characters, especially with heavier weapons. However, from the testing I did on the mannequin in the sparring grounds, weapon rarity seems to play a large part in your crit damage. So Revenant will probably do more with a gold weapon than Wilder with most blues. But generally, unless you've got a gold weapon that scales with your faith or intelligence, if you're one of the casters, you're still probably better off just letting Wilder or Raider take the crit if they're close, while you top off your health or FP, or even just hammer on your best damage options during the crit, since the boss will still take damage while your teammate is defiling it. Obviously though, if you're the only one nearby, regardless of character, it's better for someone to take the crit than no one. Number 7. Staying on the topic of stance breaks, Tree Asshole, Draconic Tree Asshole, and Knight Loretta can all be stance broken but not actually riposted. However, they will wait patiently for you to charge up a big hit on them before their horse wakes up and staggers back out of range of most attacks. So, on a stance break for them, you should really let your melee-focused teammates wind up their strongest move during this state, especially Raider. If you've played Monster Hunter, think of it the same as letting the greatsword user wake the sleeping monster. Just beware, they are not stunned for nearly as long as the bigger enemies, and there seems to be a damage threshold as well for when they stagger back, so you may only get 1 or 2 hits. And for the record, besides Ashes of War or ultimates, for single weapons, charged R2s do the most damage and stance damage. Jump R2s do the second most, and third place is uncharged R2s. If you're dual wielding, a jumping L1 will do more damage than all 3 attacks. There might be exceptions to this with specific weapons, but that's generally the hierarchy. Number 8. This one may be obvious, but if your teammate goes down during the day, you should be dropping everything to try and revive them. You have about 15 seconds before they bleed out fully. And this timer pauses briefly once you hit them, so you can stagger your hits a little bit if a boss or enemy tries to intervene. But after only 3.5 seconds, the bar will start to fill back up again, and they will continue bleeding out. 1 bar has a low damage threshold, with 2 being slightly more, but the third has twice as much as the first bar, so don't feel bad about using your ultimates or bigger spells or ashes to get your teammate up as fast as possible. Shout out Zullie the Witch for the revive threshold data. Link to her full video in the description, and you should absolutely check it out after this one. Dying during the day at best can be a big delay in your DPS and leveling as you take the time to recover your runes, and at worst you lose the level and runes permanently, which no one wants. Really try and keep close to your teammates as much as possible while roaming the map. Not only will your group likely kill bosses much faster and level quicker than if you split up, but you obviously can pick each other up and avoid major setbacks if things go wrong. Which they will. Number 9. On the contrary, during a night boss, survival of one person is infinitely more important. So if you cannot safely get to your teammates to revive them, there is much less of a rush. They will never actually die in night fights until your whole team is down, so going for a risky revive is almost never worth it unless you're worried about your own ability to stay alive. Sometimes you might be better off just evading the boss long enough till your ultimate is ready, or even getting a stance break and then skipping the crit to revive your team while the boss is staggered. If only one teammate is down, melee characters, especially Guardian, Raider, and Wilder, can generally afford to tank and keep the aggro of the boss, while the other teammate goes and revives the downed one. And especially if your teammate is Iron Eye, who is easily the best at reviving outside of character ultimates. And don't forget that I believe every ultimate has invulnerability. So what I like to do is use my most stamina efficient weapon to try and pull off the revive, but once the boss tries to intervene, which they seem hell-bent on doing, I just pop my ultimate to tank the boss attack while also finishing the revive and hitting the boss at the same time. Number 10. So the camera is often a formidable enemy in every Souls game, and this one is no different. If you're a veteran to them, you may have picked this skill up already, but learning to play unlocked, as in not locked on with the camera, and especially to switch between the two, can be a huge benefit to your combat abilities. My general rule of thumb is to lock onto things when they're far away, and unlock when they're close. I switch between a regular controller grip and a claw grip. Claw lets me use my index finger to run and roll, while rotating the camera freely with my thumb and fittingly attacking with my middle finger. This is especially useful for large enemies that you'll tend to fight by biting their ankles to topple them over, like trolls, golems, and dragons. Locking on when you're this close to such big creatures will result in some nausea-inducing camera fuckery, and playing unlocked with claw grip lets you constantly position around their feet while keeping most of their head or body in view enough to see what they're doing so you can dodge accordingly. It's also great and almost mandatory in group fights, so that you can try and keep all your opponents in view. It even lets you watch certain enemies with vertical leaps so you can time your roll as they descend, such as trolls and especially Centipede Demon, who just stays in the air for like 2 minutes. To assist with all this, I'd recommend getting used to max camera sensitivity as well, so that you can more easily locate and watch bosses. Finally, as you get more familiar with boss movesets, you'll find that playing unlocked can create many openings that rolling does not. As you can often strafe and run around the boss and hang out in their blind spots attacking for a big punish while they sit there whiffing their attacks like an asshole. So getting used to toggling lock-on mid-fight and even just fighting completely unlocked against certain things is a skill that I recommend trying to get more comfortable with. Number 11. Continuing with more specific boss tech to optimize your DPS and minimize your dying, let's talk about the horseback riding dickheads. Knights Cavalry, both Tree Sentinels, and Knight Loretta. They're all right-handed, and as such, are much less threatening on their left sides, as they usually have to reposition or take the time to switch hands with their weapon, which gives you a lot of time to counterattack and avoid their clumsy follow-ups. So always try to roll to your right and towards their left to get on the opposite side of their weapon and towards the back of their horse even. Even Draconic Hitbox himself can't do much but try and scratch you with his edgy shield or run away. For the most part, they really don't know what to do when you're not directly next to their weapon, and when they inevitably try the horse stomp, you can typically just walk around them or out of range and charge up a big punish trying to get a stance break. And on top of trying to position yourself on their weak side, the Knights Cavalry also like to do this weird skid pivot thing when they're just dashing around when they try to stop. And you should get used to recognizing this animation, as it's a free punish if you're close to them. And to close out the anti-horseman section, all of them except the flail guy can be parried. Number 12. Jump attacks are still broken. They do so much stance damage, it's crazy, and jumping itself has a lot of utility in combat as well. So first off, jumping still seems to give you some amount of lower body iframes as it does in base Elden Ring, which means you can reliably jump to avoid a lot of the low to the ground moves, such as the Crucible Night Stomps, Tree Spirit Tail Swipes, Godric Shockwaves, and even some attacks from some of the Night Lords. but this also works against some attacks that you may not expect, such as the infamous bell-bearing dickhead's weirdly delayed grab attack. There are probably more, so let me know in the comments of any others you may have found. Dual-wield jump attacks especially are insane, as they're your most damaging single attacks other than some ashes, and I believe do the second most stance damage, with first being two-handed charged heavies. Your jump L1s will probably stagger most enemies, and after 3 or 4 in a row, will stance break them for a crit. And even with curved swords, your jump L1 hits 4 times, so you can rapidly build status and damage. Spamming jump attacks isn't your best DPS, but if you're using heavier weapons, you can almost guarantee a stance break by stun locking certain enemies with them, which is almost certainly death against most enemies. Especially in co-op where you can all just wail on them. And it's a pretty viable way of just dealing with stuff like Omens, Godric Knights, and Banished Knights, if you have heavy weapons. So it is a very viable strategy, especially in co-op, to throw out a ton of these against bosses when you're able to try and get that stance break so that your team can really bully the confused boss. Number 13. You should be spamming your character skills, and especially in co-op. They will drastically improve your group's efficiency, and a lot of the skills have some creative ways to use them. So if you're playing Wilder, I should see you zipping around the arena like Spider-Man, and if you're using a greatsword, that shit should always be flaming. You can also just use your claw to move around the world pretty fast too, and do a lot of cool movement things if you're creative. And against small enemies that you can pull, it can do a decent chunk of damage from pretty far away. So you can kinda just snipe stray enemies in your travels for a few extra souls, or to help your group clear a camp or the mobs before the night boss. This skill makes Wilder what he is, and it's incredible. Iron Eye's mark should be up almost constantly on bosses. It increases everyone's damage output, and can also be used as a great movement or evasion option, or even just to shoot forward and finish off an enemy, as it does a decent little bit of damage. When you're close when you use it, you can use it to mark an enemy and quickly move away if you change direction fast enough. It's a very cool move with a ton of utility, probably the best skill in the game. Raider's skill, especially when boosted, will pretty much stagger everything. Duchess, this is another one that I don't see people using enough online. Duchess should be restaging every time someone lands a big chunk of damage in a short window, as you can really blow up boss health bars with this. It's literally just free damage like every 10 seconds if you're paying attention to what your team is doing. Guardian's Whirlwind, especially when charged, is a crowd control machine and can just steamroll a camp or group boss encounter. These skills are obviously what make these characters stand out from base Elden Ring, and you should be using them in every encounter to maximize your team's efficiency. Number 14. To a slightly lesser extent, don't hoard your ultimates either. The cooldowns are obviously much slower, but most ultimates can instantly finish a fight or save your team. Wilders, and I guess Executors, pretty much always stagger bosses, often stance break, and can wipe out an entire group of enemies. Guardian's Dive Bomb is a guaranteed revive no matter how full the bar is, as his Revenants and Duchess's Invis can take the heat off your team. I believe every ultimate has invulnerability on activation, so you can use them to avoid damage while also drastically changing the course of the fight. The flowchart with your ultimates should be: will this finish the fight or dramatically improve our odds? If yes, let that shit rock. If no, you're probably wrong, so use it anyway. They are really good. Number 15. Unlike base Elden Ring, you can block with any weapon without taking physical damage, including staves. Your stamina bar will probably explode, depending on the attack, but you can do it in a pinch. And the worst that happens if you run out of stamina is that you're stance broken and left vulnerable. But being stance broken for a few seconds, especially at the end of a boss's attack chain, is much better than sniffing the ground while you're waiting for an adult to help you out. Just be aware, it's only perfect physical block, so you'll still take elemental chip damage. So this emergency block will only work for full physical attacks. So if you're not sure, you should still probably try to dodge it. To be extra clear, this is a last resort for most characters. When a mistimed roll will kill you, but lending your entire stamina bar to the game for several business days will ensure your survival, it can be worth it. However, if you're confident in your rolls and don't panic, that is almost always the better defensive option. Unless you're fishing for a guard counter but not carrying a shield. Though this generally will be reserved for the tankier characters, these do a ton of stance damage if they connect, and even a level 1 Revenant can instantly stance break certain enemies with a guard counter from her claws. To call it situational feels like an understatement, but knowledge is power. You're welcome. Number 16. Here's a quicker tip. If you find an item with the multiple or many periodical Glintblades passive on it, take it, especially as a melee character. These things can be amazing at chipping away bosses and just automatically deleting enemies as you approach them or just walk near them. It can be really cool for just engaging groups, catching enemies to sneak up on you, and just extra damage against anything without you having to try. And even better, if you're able to pick the giant Glintblades reward after a boss, this thing is incredible. It's pretty much all the same benefits of the other ones, but cranked up to 10. The free damage is cool, but the best part of the giant ones is the stagger damage. It's kind of insane, especially if you're using heavier weapons that do a lot of stagger yourself. You'll be stance breaking bosses left and right, even the Night Lords. It's wild. Don't sleep on this effect. Number 17. If you come across any of these large gravestones with loot in front of it, it is imperative that you check it. It has a high chance of dropping a Wraith Calling Bell, an infinite use consumable which lets you summon one of these little homing fireballs. The crazy thing is that despite how they work in base Elden Ring, where they scale with magic stats, in Nightreign they seem to do the same damage no matter what character you're playing, and the damage is also unaffected by your level. They're not the fastest moving projectile, but they track pretty well and travel quite a distance, so this can be a really neat ranged option for your melee characters where you could use them the same way as the other ranged consumables, except this one refills at every grace and gives you a lot more uses per slot. They do not consume a lot of FP either, so even at level 1, Wilder can cast 10 of these. And look at the damage from all of them. You'll get more use from these in co-op while the bosses chase your teammates, but there's also nothing wrong with just backing off a bit during certain night boss attacks to shoot a few of them from a safe distance. You have no time limit for the night bosses, as I mentioned, so there is no rush. Just play safe. And standing far away and launching a barrage of annoying little projectiles that track your enemies is a pretty safe option. Number 18. Similarly to the Wraith Calling Bell, bows are not just viable for Iron Eye. He is obviously the best with a bow, but every character can find success with a decent bow. Or crossbow, I guess, but crossbows are so slow. Your arrows are infinite, and smaller bows let you do rolling, running, and jumping shots. As you've probably seen, these mobility options while shooting are what make Iron Eye such an incredible support character, as he can revive everyone pretty safely, while staying mobile and keeping up constant damage on enemies and bosses. So in co-op, if you've got a bow and your teammate goes down, or if the boss is doing some horseshit that you want to be far away from, even if you're Raider or Wilder, whip out your bow and take aim. Number 19. This one is maybe niche or incredibly useful. I haven't been able to test it to the full extent, but it has to do with grab attacks, which are not a new thing in Souls games. So in Nightreign, they're telegraphed by the signature audio cue and a purple lightning effect. Said grab attacks in past Souls games have a mechanic where if you quickly mash your L1 and R1 buttons during the animation, you'll reduce the amount of damage you take. This is a mechanic in base Elden Ring, but the only enemy I've been able to fully test it against in Nightreign is the Abductor Virgins in the forts. As you can see, the version where I mashed takes a good chunk less damage, so if you get caught by these, definitely mash, and against many of the other grabs in the game, well, there's really not much to lose by just doing it anyways, since at worst you're doing nothing, and at best you're surviving a would-be fatal attack. Number 20. And finally, last but not least, but probably least, a bit of tech that I'll refer to as backstep buffering. This is quite niche tech that's been in the last few Souls games, where you can buffer a backstep by pressing the roll button during any action, and then change the direction you'll backstep in by holding your left stick opposite the direction you want to go. So for a forward advancing backstep after an R1, you press the roll button during your attack, and then quickly hold down afterward, and your character should face your screen and backstep away. This only works if you're not locked onto something. Backstep attacks are pretty cool and tend to be pretty solid advancing attacks, but since you don't have iframes on backsteps by default unless you're playing Duchess, then it's hard to justify using them over just a rolling attack. But this tech can give you a weird way to weave them into your gameplay, if only because they look cool. I'm not sure yet if they're super practical, especially given how tight the input is, but against some enemies that like to leap away after being hit, like rats, pages, and the mannequins, you can potentially pull this off to chase them with a backstep and then follow with a backstep attack, or I guess any other attack of choice out of the backstep. It can also open up alternate options to reposition, if you're someone who likes to use rolls to get into place. Backsteps cost a bit less stamina than rolls do. It's probably not the most useful tech, and is a pretty tight window to pull off, which is why it's last on the list. Not that the list is fully ordered. But it's really cool to be able to pull off, and part of the fun of these games is pulling off sick plays and challenging yourself to do cool shit. Alright, well that's the end of the list. I hope these tips can help you really level up your combat abilities against the plethora of annoying and formidable creatures and characters this game will throw at you. I myself have been using the majority of these tips for years. Specifically, I'm a huge fan of dual wielding, and I'm a jump attack whore. Especially after stance breaks, and I hope to see more people get their free hits on a downed boss before they take the crit, since you're really just giving up free damage. Feel free to leave any questions or tips of your own in the comments, and if you enjoyed this list, a like on the video would be amazing, and subscribe if you're into fighting games or Souls content. I do kind of want to put equal time into fighting games and Souls content going forward, but I've been exclusively Mortal Kombat so far. I love the Souls series and have several Elden Ring specific videos that I've kind of planned out from years ago, as well as more plans for Mortal Kombat and future fighting games, like that awesome Marvel Tag Fighter that was just announced. If you're one of my MK viewers, the Noob Guide is next, and then I've got a new series I want to start that will highlight specific tech that I'm aware of for different cameo pairings. Spoiler, Cyrax Self-Destruct will be the star of the first episode. Think of them like bite-sized versions of my cameo classes that really focus on one particular move and setups from it. But that's going to do it from me. Thank you very much for watching, especially if you're one of my longtime Mortal Kombat viewers. Your support and patience with my dogshit upload schedule means the world. Every one of you is awesome. Later.